Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll ignore how long I was talking for the past few minutes in qualifying. Less than a minute to go now, but we are here for round 10 of the AROC Racing League's historic championship for what was 2025, now creeping into 2026. Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome back to the world of the AROC Racing League. It is great to be back on your screens, folks. We should have had a couple more rounds over the past few weeks, but I may or may not have slightly got my dates a bit muddled up. We had a few races over Tuesdays during the holidays so that we could avoid clashes like Christmas and New Year's Day, etc. But yeah, apologies for missing on those 2 rounds. But you jump back in on the action for round 10 for each respective championship, so still a couple more rounds to go after this one. We jump into the end of qualifying here as well. We're on board with pole sitter Andrew Whitehead. The timer hits 0, and Andrew Whitehead hits the wall heading into the final corner here at Goodwood. Obviously a fabulous racing venue is Goodwood. Many a time have we seen the ominous onlookers. We've seen the ominous onlookers many a time, but many a time have we seen historic Alfa Romeo machinery heading around these hallowed corners, usually at a damn good rate of knots, with some fantastic noise coming out the front end of the car as well, if I do say so. And that is certainly going to be the case this evening. Thinking back, you're not going to be seeing the likes of some of the internet footage that we've seen from Goodwood. I think back to Ford Galaxies versus Minis and Alfa Romeo machinery versus other muscle cars as well in some historic racing. Not quite that mixed class competition this evening, but it's just going to be some good, fair racing between our drivers here this evening. Whitehead takes provisional pole, and it's looking a little bit more than provisional as well. It's looking like a pretty secure pole, unless Matt Daly can do anything in the final 10 seconds of the lap. We head through that final corner, pushing that momentum as much as he can. Doesn't abandon the lap. What's it going to be for Daly? And as he crosses the line, it's a 124.0 to beat. Does not beat it, unfortunately, for Matt Daly. It's a 124.2. That's the best that he can do in this session, which means after qualifying draws to a close, it's Andrew Whitehead on pole. Then we have Matt Daly running in P2, and Alan Matthews P3, Steve Knight in P4, and then we have Andy Webb completing the top 5. Miles Davis also running in this session, has a lap on the timing system but not recorded in the session so far. So it's going to be 6 cars competing in the order for race 1 this evening. That's your grid order. It's going to be Whitehead versus Daly on the front row, and we'll get ready for racing action in a few minutes here at Goodwood. Well, here we are, ladies and gentlemen, on the grid, ready for race one this evening here at Goodwood. Should be a good one. Hello, ominous onlookers. 6 cars lining up for that run down to the Madgwick corner. Ultra high speeds here at Goodwood, of course. You're flat out for the majority of the lap in these cars, I suspect. It means the fuel usage is going to be high. Expect the pace to change dramatically throughout the even short races that we have here. But most importantly, it's going to be a little bit of a test of driver endurance. One small mistake here. It's a classic British circuit. It's unforgiving. There's grass either side. And there's also 6 red lights on the gantry. And we are away for race one here this evening. It is a slow start for Andrew Whitehead, your pole sitter there, who gets a slow shift up into second gear. That costs him big time as we run down into the first right-hander. This allows Matt Daly to sweep on past into second, and in first goes Daly. And there's contact between Whitehead and Matthews. That drops Matthews back all the way down into fifth. Just that one bit of momentum lost has cost him big time at the very start of this race. We head further down into the race though, and we can see that Miles Davis running along in P3 at the moment. 1.5 seconds is the gap between himself and P1. Daly still leading the charge and 0.3 of a second, separates himself and Whitehead as we head through the final corner. Back end stepping out there as is typical of the final run through Woodcote there, but back on to the start finish straight we go. Daly leads ahead of Whitehead, then we have Davis in P3 and Matthews back up into fourth. He's gained a position on Andy Webb, who's not had perhaps the most electric start in this race, but is still only around about half a second behind Alan Matthews, so still very much in the fight here. Steve Knight as well, also going quite well in qualifying. We saw his car on screen for a little while. He's looking pretty strong in this race as well, so might be able to clinging on to a top 5 position finish here, potentially. 23 minutes left on the clock. Daly still leads us ahead of Whitehead, as we can see Daly up in front. So Whitehead recovering pretty well given his start. Could have been a lot worse based on that small misshift into second gear. I'm not sure if it was a misshift or whether it just kind of bogged down. Either way, it did cost him a lot of time, a lot of track position, perhaps more crucially, which is less than ideal. Apologies for the small lag issues, folks. I can see that appearing on your screens. I can confirm no settings changes take place between rounds, and I haven't got anything running in the background. I do work in IT, so I'm actually fairly handy at getting the PC up and running usually. I don't know why this season, though, it has just decided, you know what, sometimes it doesn't really want to play ball and give us a smooth experience. Hopefully it will sort itself out, and I might dip away in the background every now and again to try and get that resolved for you folks. But 22 minutes left on the clock. Daly still leads us by 0.7 of a second. Whitehead just behind as well. And we head on further into the lap here, past Ford Wharton into St Mary's in just a moment. St Mary's can catch you out. It's quite a nasty corner because you've got all that speed that you've picked up on the exit of Madgwick. You carry that into the left-hander. The braking zone is not very substantial at all because you can carry a decent amount of speed, but if you just ever so slightly misjudge it, I'll try that again, you end up washing out onto the grass. Then you head around the Levant, onto the Levant straight before you complete the lap. So very quick fire lap kind of tour here at Goodwood, and these drivers certainly completing it quickly as well. 124.3 is the pace of Matt Daly at the moment, although Whitehead is the driver setting the absolute best laps in this race with 124.2s as he does his utmost to hunt down Matt Daly. Small issues there for Alan Matthews, who heads out of Woodcote there, able to get back on throttle, but did lose some time as a result. Sorry, it wasn't really Woodcote, it was a chicane after Woodcote, of course. But yeah, Alan Matthews losing a little bit of performance there, running over that curve. He's back underway, hasn't actually lost any positions out to Andy Webb, so he's able to continue on in P4. Not the position he wanted to be at, I'm sure, based on that race start, but he has lost one position compared to his grid formation at least. Briefly had a grasp at second before a slight bit of contact earlier on. That back end is beginning to kick out on Alan Matthews' car. I'd be interested, oh dear, well, that looks fantastic. I'm sure Alan was actually just going for the thumbnail shot that we all want to see, because that lovely bit of opposite lock there was feeding in very nicely towards the second half of that lap, and it looked fantastic. So if that's what he was going for, then power to you, Alan Matthews, but it might cost you some time. I do think the back end of that car's already looking quite squirrely and interesting there, so maybe an odd or more extreme setup perhaps on Alan Matthews' car causing that. We will have to see. Either way, he continues on in fourth. Matt Daly still leading us, but most importantly building up a gap, and Miles Davis, who's been running along in P3 pretty comfortably for some time now, has a big moment on the entry into Woodcote. These cars don't have modern anti-lock braking systems. They don't have a modern braking system full stop, really. I mean, I believe they've got discs, which is not a given of a car from this era, of course. But Davis there, yeah, back end stepped out on him under braking there, trying to scrub off all that speed into Woodcote. And it looks like we're still seeing continuing struggles here for some of these drivers. I do begin to ponder these vintage tyres that we in the historics we on a vintage tyre compound cross-ply. That is something obviously that you would see on a car of this era, but it seems to be very difficult to get that vulcanized rubber to misbehave in the races that we've visited so far, at least just from my onlookers view, as we do have more onlookers on the camera, very disconcerting fashion. At least from my view, the historics have done pretty well on the tyres in each round so far this season. By all means, as I'm sure they will, the drivers, please do correct me when I'm inevitably incorrect. but it seems to be already 7 minutes into this race that the vintage tyre compound is giving up the ghost a little bit, and that is perhaps unsurprising. Front left tyre here at Goodwood, as I had to briefly remind myself which corner I'm on about. Yeah, front left tyre does take a bit of a beating here, doesn't it? It's very high speed circuit. It's not like a modern racing car with downforce and aerodynamics and a modern suspension system that might be a little bit more forgiving on the tyres because the grip's all there. This car is quite a bit more historic, shall we say, hence why it's the historic championship, and therefore might not be the most compliant and most controlled platform. So these tyres could be getting a bit of a beating here at Goodwood. It will be very interesting to see how things shape up later on into this race. As I mentioned, the fuel tanks are going to be pretty heavily laden in this evening's running, but they should shed off a lot of that weight, so that would afford some pace. But at the same time, if these tyres are beginning to drop off, we are going to see that reflected in the times. And you know what, folks? I think we already could be. We're seeing 124.4s, 124.569. The one outlier to that is Matt Daly with his absolute fastest lap, which was posted a lap or so ago at 123.7, which is just, quite frankly, in a different league. But even Matt now, 124.8, 124.5, 120. Yeah, we're seeing a couple of tenths now just beginning to disappear from these drivers. So I can only imagine that perhaps the tyres not quite at their ultimate in this one. Apologies for the small technical issues, folks. They should be looking pretty resolved now. We have 15 minutes left to go in this race. 15 minutes on the clock there. Matt Daly still leads us. Whitehead running in second as we have Andy Webb having a little bit of a small foray into the grass, shall we say. And thank you, Alex, for confirming. Yep, all good. Glad that it's good on your end as well. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in, watching along, getting those comments in, getting any feedback in. I've been a bit naughty on the comments this evening, haven't actually monitored them at all, so I will jump on the YouTube comments, but those of you in the WhatsApp group, by all means, get any comments, queries, questions or feedback in. I do my utmost to give them a read when I can remember, which is not right now, clearly. Getting those comments, but as I say, yeah, any comments, questions or queries, make sure to get them in, and you have, and it can be about anything. It can be my favourite type of cheeses, it can be how much wine did I drink over Christmas, it can be what's my favourite alpha, it can also be more important stuff like how to get involved in the AROC racing leagues or about anything pertaining to the racing. We will endeavour to get those questions answered, and as I say, by all means, do get involved as well. We're getting close to the halfway marker in this race now. Daly's leading pretty comfortably. It looks like Whitehead struggling in a similar place to where Miles Davis did as well. There's the flames on the overrun for Alan Matthews. It looks to be that the braking zone into Woodcote is just becoming that little bit more treacherous now. Oh, it is. We have a big spin for Steve Knight. He's one of our hopeful drivers I mentioned who was looking pretty well sorted heading into this race weekend. Tumbles back down into 6th position. Still a decent haul of points to be taken away from that one, as long as he gets the car pointing in the right direction on the tarmac and can bring it home at the end of this race. there'll still be some decent points on order, and that's exactly what Steve Knight needs. Steve Knight, if there's one thing you can credit him with, it is fantastic consistency and his. You can always depend on Steve Knight to be there each round. He will be there, he will be partaking, he will be seeing it through and giving it his best. So that means that he is rewarded at the end of the championship with some decent point hauls in that midfield action. So it'd be great to see where Steve ends up as we head into the twilight races of this season as well. Would you believe it? It has absolutely flown by, has this championship. And as I say, yeah, it's been a long championship as well, slightly longer than the championships we would usually have. I believe round 10 would pretty much be the final round at this point. We're slightly off kilter. Actually, instead of having a winter break this year, we just continue straight on into 2026, which means, yeah, it feels like it's actually been quite a quick championship given the length of time that it has been going on for. A very important championship for us as well. Do make sure, as I say, that you do get involved, and any comments or questions that you might have pertaining to getting involved, by all means get them in. We are always welcoming feedback, always looking for new ways to innovate, have some fun out there as well. And I can't wait to see what the future holds in terms of our future championships as well. Well, enough of me waffling on about the future. Let's talk about what's going on right now. And it is Matt Daly, perhaps no surprise, still leading this race. 3.5 seconds to gap down to Andrew Whitehead, who had a fantastic qualifying. Matt Daly was not able to get near to Andrew Whitehead. Matt Daly wasn't able to do the Matt Daly special of put it on pole right at the end of the session, because Whitehead had such strong pace here this evening. And unfortunately, that one small race start mistake has cost him. What this does mean, though, is that race 2 should be advantage Andrew Whitehead as we head into the reverse grid race coming up next. The grid is, of course, a full grid reversal for this evening, as we have 7 drivers or less on the field. So we're going to see the entire order from race 1, the entire finishing results from this first race being completely flipped on the starting grid for race number 2. So it will be Whitehead ahead of Daly, but they'll be at the back end of the pack. But that could be an important opportunity for Andrew Whitehead, as we have another important moment in this race for Matt Daly. First bit of lap traffic we're going to contend with this evening, and it will be Steve Knight against Matt Daly. Steve very courteously giving Matt Daly the room to sweep on past into the first corner. Nice and easy. I don't even think Matt Daly would have lost any time at all. If anything, a little bit of slipstream, might have even gained something. And he is able to find a way past Steve Knight and continues on in the lead of this race. Now, if you're Andrew Whitehead, you just need to try and replicate that as we head through into the mid-phase of the lap. Whitehead needs to be getting past Steve Knight when he eventually encounters him, and find a way on through without costing himself any major time. One of my least favourite members of the army. If you're sick of dad puns, then I'm sorry, but there is one. I'm not a dad, yeah, enjoy that. Miles Davis, moving swiftly on, shall we? With less than 10 minutes to go in this race, is currently running in P4. 1.5 seconds down on Alan Matthews, so still very close and very much within shouting distance of a podium in this race. So I would quite like to have a look at what the stats are telling us as we head further into the running. Miles Davis P4, a 1:24.6 on that last lap. His best lap overall, 1:24.0. His last lap then for Miles Davis actually matches Alan Matthews' 1:24.6, but perhaps more importantly, Alan Matthews 1:24.5 best overall lap. So Miles Davis has another half a second somewhere in that car. The question is, where is that half a second now? Because it isn't here at the moment, and it might have been earlier on in the race. Perhaps a knock of confidence from that spin earlier on. Maybe the condition of the car beginning to drop below ideal levels. Or maybe just plain old luck is going to actually swing into the favour of Miles Davis as a small error, a small incursion onto the grass. I mentioned that this old school British circuit was unforgiving, and there we have proof of it, ladies and gentlemen. Alan Matthews, a small dip onto the grass at relatively high speeds, cost him so much momentum. He will be suffering with that all the way through, perhaps even St Mary's Corner and towards the Levant. Either way, we can see Miles Davis' car heading around the left-hander on the bump stops, as is done in historic racing. with that lovely soft suspension which we are so robbed of in modern automotive machinery. Miles Davis finds a way past on into P3. It was a reverse commentator's curse, folks, because I was only talking about what could be potentially a podium if everything goes right for Miles Davis, and lo and behold, right there and then it all goes right for Miles Davis, but oh so wrong for Alan Matthews as we head into the latter half and final stages of this lap. Now just one heavy braking zone to negotiate before you head into the chicane at slightly lower speed, and through you go onto the start finish straight. Miles Davis back in with a shout of another podium here. Will be a season of multiple podiums in his debut year in the AROC Racing League, so that is going to be a pretty happy record to be taking in to 2026, and he's made the difference when it counts. That's all that is to be said about that. Alan Matthews is a very experienced driver, a very capable, very fast driver, someone who I certainly couldn't keep up with in the sim. But Miles Davis, when it just so counted, oh so importantly here in this evening's racing, has made that difference and is up into P3. But we've seen it change in a blink of an eye so far in this race already. With 7 minutes to go, who's not to say that won't change once more as we head into the final phase of this race, and it oh so nearly does there. That got a little bit too close to comfort, I suspect, heading through the Levant there. We saw a little bit of a dip onto the curb. It was a sausage curb, but it caused the suspension to completely compress. The chassis got unhappy, and Davis did well to keep hold of the car. Alan Matthews then is actually not too far behind, is hunting down Miles Davis. Is just over 2 seconds now. That gap has closed up dramatically. Any small mistakes like that in the final few laps of this race, it's going to be very close fighting between these two for that all-important step on the podium. And speaking of close fighting, well, it's Andrew Whitehead, and he's closing up on Matt Daly. I alluded to earlier on the tyres potentially beginning to drop off, and I'm pleased to report I was completely wrong. The times are only getting better, folks, as Miles Davis has had a big impact, and there we go, folks. Just as I said, it can all change in the blink of an eye. Some people might even call that karma. Now, that is unfair because Miles Davis did absolutely nothing wrong. But as he heads on to the next lap, Davis is in P5 and now battling with his rookie rival, Andy Webb, as we head into this first corner. This is disaster for Miles Davis, who had just clawed onto the podium with a small gasp of luck, really. And that has all been unravelled as we head further into this race. Davis drops down to P5, as I say. Utter disaster, and his only hopes in the final 5 minutes now, with an 8-second margin down to P3, will be a P4 if he can get that. Andy Webb has not quite been there in terms of pace with Miles Davis so far, but we'll have to wait and see what the old confidence meter is saying as we head into the final phase of the race. Final 4 minutes of this race, then Matt Daly very nearly finds himself no longer leading this race as we head through the chicane. That was an unfortunate bit of camera timing, wasn't it, Matt? What I was going to say has been a seemingly flawless execution of race 1. I'm still going to call it flawless. It just became quite close to being flawed. I would have been floored if the race had certainly panned out that way, if Andrew Whitehead was able to claw it back after that. But it has been not only a little while since we've done a championship standings recall, but also I've missed a round. So even I'm going to be questioning what is currently going on this championship. But for the effect and for the professionalism, I know some of you at home are probably wondering what's going on with the championship, folks, but it's okay. I'm going to tell you now, because I already know all of that important facts and figures. It's Matt Daly who leads us with 290 points, only 5 ahead of Andrew Whitehead. Andrew Whitehead and Daly are becoming the clear favourites in this championship. Knief attendance, unfortunately, has not quite been there in the past couple of rounds, although he did do an impressive effort earlier on in this season with getting 230 points with the races that he has been at. He was a very strong competitor in the likes of the races at Anglesey and also Silverstone at the very start of the season springs to mind. But Matt Daly leads us with 290 points as he uses as much of the track as he does and then some. 5 points clear of Andrew Whitehead, 285. Then we have Knief on 233, as I mentioned. Then it's Alan Matthews in P4 in the standings, P3 in this race with 214. So actually, Alan Matthews, after this evening's racing, is going to overtake Colin Knief and still be in mathematical contention for a championship here, folks. So that would be really impressive stuff if we do see that. Miles Davis, 195 points to his name, folks. His debut season, no less, and he's in the top 5 in the standings, and who knows, could go higher still. Andy Webb, a little bit of a gap down in points to 139, but still a really impressive effort ahead of the likes of Jack Hodson and Steve Knight. It's Andy Webb in P6 139. Then we have Jack Hodson P7 108. Then we have Steve Knight on 74 points. I mentioned he's been rewarded with his consistency, his attendance, and the ability to just get out on track and just put some laps in. And he's currently P8 in the standings on 74 points to his name, which I believe will be one of his best season records. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but that's impressive stuff. Guy Swarbrick on 64 points at the moment. 9th in the championship, is unlikely to be here for the next few rounds. Again, I won't allude too much, but I just want to say great to hear that Cam is seemingly recovering well, and wish you all and the family all the best with that. Greg Young, 30 points to his name, P10. Then we have John Cole, Andy Craig, Paul Milburn, Mike Hilton and Alex Smith completing our 15 strong standing for this championship, as we see Alan Matthews lapping past Steve Knight there, head through the chicane as well, where it nearly went wrong for Matt Daly, and it does go wrong for Alan Matthews this time as well. He's able to get back out on track. Steve Knight may unlap himself here with that extra momentum, and Alan Matthews did well to get that back on track without losing too much time. Although 30 seconds left, this means we will be on the penultimate lap of this race. That should not be enough time in the race for Davis and Matthews to have another encounter, another battle on track, but who knows, one more error and we could see that very much being the case. 15 seconds left on the clock then. And it is going to be Matt Daly who leads as Whitehead. I mentioned doing a commendable effort to close up that gap. Unfortunately, it's not going to be quite enough, so it seems, in this race, and we are going to go on board and remain on board with Matt Daly, who is someone we've barely been on camera with at all in this race, really, because he's just been doing, for the most part, a really, really comfortable job out in the front ends of the pack, and heads on through the chicane once more. Back onto the start-finish straight we go to start the final lap of the race then. And it was a 24.5 for Daly that time around. Whitehead on a 23-second lap, so clearly no issues with car pace there, and closing up that gap to Matt Daly. I suspect Daly's lap was a little bit scruffier than perhaps he would have wanted, but still, that gap most certainly being closed down, which means it's getting very interesting indeed for Daly here. 1.3 seconds is the margin. We head into that chicane, and it should be plain sailing from here on out for Matt Daly. He's led. Oh dear, as the back end does get rather squirrely, doesn't it? You can see just how much work the front suspension on this car has to do. It's live axle on the back, so it's a little bit less tame perhaps. But that front end putting in all that work for the high-speed switchback corners here at Goodwood. And it has caught a couple of drivers out so far, as we have already seen, folks. But so far, Daly seems to have just about tamed this beast. It's much less of a beast than it was a few rounds ago, I must say. Those of you who are perhaps shying away from the historic championship based on how the car was in the first half of the season, I thoroughly recommend you get back involved, because it is an alleged joy to drive now. I'm ashamed to say I haven't given it too much of a go, but it is an absolute pleasure to drive, so I'm told by many of the drivers. And it's certainly going to be a pleasure if you are Matt Daly or Andrew Whitehead, because they round the final corner with Whitehead closing up, but it's going to be Matt Daly who takes the race 1 victory. Congratulations, Matt. Congratulations, Whitehead, as well, for really closing down that gap. A couple more laps, folks. We would have been on for a good battle for the lead here, as we have another change of position. Now, this is a big one heading into Woodcote. 28-second margin, by the way, to P1 and P2. That's just how much form that Daly and Whitehead have. But, oh dear, Miles Davis, who just taken the overtake there to take P3, ends up in the barrier on the entry into the chicane. It all goes wrong for Miles Davis. Matthews completes the race in the end there, rounds out that podium. Andy Webb is promoted into P4 after all is said and done. And then we have Miles Davis, I am sure, utter despair there, as Knight nearly unlaps himself. Miles Davis clonks into the barrier, just like that. Right at the very last moment, a brave overtake there saw him a hero, and unfortunately, one small mistake into that chicane saw him his own villain. Either way, that brings an end to that exhilarating race. What a crescendo towards the end there. I suspect that we probably needed a couple more laps there, folks, because that was getting interesting. Either way, Daly brings it home, takes that race 1 victory. It's going to be Whitehead and Matthews completing your podium, followed by Webb, Davis and Knight completing the order from race 1. Well, that was a good one, folks, and I'm pleased to report we have a bit more coming up in just a moment. Join us in a few minutes as we get ready for race 2, our reverse grid race. What we are watching here, folks, is Matt Cam. Matt's got a bit... I tried to have a look at some victory donuts, which were impressive, and thankfully the game's corrected him now. Matt's exploring the local scenery. See you in a few minutes, folks. Well, welcome back to the action, ladies and gentlemen. We're here on the grid and ready for race 2, our reverse grid race. Let's have a look at that reverse grid then. Obviously a little bit different here at Goodwood. You got your 3 grid slots all in a row, and then we have Steve Knight, Miles Davis, Andy Webb all lining up right next to the start-finish line there. And then we have Alan Matthews and Andrew White completing row 2, and then all on his lonesome, perhaps as punishment for his excursions into the paddock, it is Matt Daly completing the field here in this evening's racing. That is a substantial disadvantage, I must say, but it's such is the way with Goodwood. That's why you want to be in those higher positions in the early qualifying sessions. Either way, we do indeed have 6 red lights on the gantry. The revs have risen, and we are away for race 2 here this evening. It's a great start for Alan Matthews, who already worms his way between Miles Davis and Steve Knight. Andy Webb gets a good enough start, gets his nose out in front, but Matthews, the real hero in this run down into turn 1 from P4 into the race lead. There's contact between Miles Davis and Andy Webb, and looks of it is those two. And there we go. That is Webb off and into the infield. Davis continues on in P5 just behind Matt Daly. But what a dream start for Alan Matthews and Steve Knight as well. Steve Knight doing an impeccable job here in this reverse grid race. Hopefully he can keep this momentum up, because this is a great start to the action this evening for race 2. 4/10 of a second down on race lead, and quite importantly, pretty clear of Andrew Whitehead at the moment. Andrew Whitehead, the nearest competitor, 2 seconds down on that race lead. And we see that Matthews, perhaps redemption for race 1, which in the end I suppose he didn't with the P3, but it was not an easy ride, a bit of a bumpy roller coaster to get to that P3. So Matthews, I'm sure, just hoping for plain sailing from this position, because, well, that's what he deserves, isn't it? It'd be a nice way for him to head into the final few races of this season with another race victory to add to his existing tally. 23 minutes left on the clock then. We complete our first lap of this reverse grid race. Everyone apart from Andy Webb, who had that unfortunate early incident, is staying pretty close. Miles Davis as well, obviously 4 seconds down as well. A few seconds of that at least can be attributed to that racing incident that was encountered on the first lap. But everyone else all in pretty close quarters, it must be said. Matthews clearing away from the rest of the pack, and this is a part of the race where I suspect that all of a sudden Steve Knight, if he can, becomes Matthews' better end, because what he'll be hoping for, Will Matthews, is that Steve Knight could have kept Andrew Whitehead behind. That hasn't worked out, unfortunately, for him this time. Whitehead is on through, and I'm sure we'll be hunting down Alan Matthews to have a great battle with him in mere laps. Matt Daly's also on the scene as well. He's closed up quite nicely on Steve Knight, and we'll soon be putting that pressure on as well. Knight taking a slightly wider run in, whereas Daly keeps the car planted on the inside of the right-hander. There goes side by side with Steve Knight, and here we go. Should be able to get the nose out in front as we head onto the Levant Straight before even really getting to the next corner. Although it must be said, Steve Knight's car looking pretty handy down that straight line, just about giving Matt Daly enough room there. Great work by both drivers to put on a great little battle heading down that Levant Straight there. Through Woodcut we go, and in to the chicane to complete the lap. Steve Knight loses out eventually, but puts up a very good fight indeed, as we see Daly using as much of the track as he does, heading onto that grass. There we see Miles Davis replicating that, heading through the chicane and nearly having another chicane-based incident. That would be 2 within the past 10 minutes, which would be impressive stuff. But luckily for him, is still pointing in the right direction, is still racing in this battle, and might find a way past Steve Knight in just a moment. But speaking of battles brewing, Alan Matthews will be beginning to look in his rearview mirror, if he isn't at least, I don't know, being taunted by Andrew Whitehead in the AROC Racing League paddock chat, which he could well be. They're both sat there in the paddock chat at this moment in time. In fact, everyone in this race session is bar Matt Daly. Matt Daly getting his head down, staying focused, and not wanting any inter-rival communication, shall we say. Everyone else is having a grand old time. I suspect it's probably more something like a headset failure or something like that, because Daly's a very sociable bloke, as I well know, with his fabulous little Alpha Sud at National Alpha Day. By the way, tickets have now been released. I'll do my registrar and etc. duties now by saying, if you haven't already got AROC Racing, not AROC Racing Leagues, National Alpha Day tickets, get them booked. Get those booked, because tickets will sell fast. Those opportunities to do a little parade lap will certainly go quite quickly. So do make sure let you get yourself down to Bicester for another fantastic day's worth of Alfa Romeo-based goodness. There's not much more to say. I know it sounds very generic, but that's all National Alpha Day is. It's just a good day related to Alfa Romeos. What more could you want? It's usually fantastic weather. There's a wide variety of cars on offer, as in to look at, some also for sale. As we have Andrew Whitehead having a bit of an issue there. We're going to divert away from National Alpha Day chat. As through that first corner, Whitehead finds himself in the barrier, as does Miles Davis, replicating it pretty much exactly that incident. Whitehead down into P3. This could be disaster for Andrew Whitehead in this, not just this race, but this championship as well, folks, because let's not forget, every single position begins to matter just that little bit more as we head further into each race of each round. There was a 5-point margin between Whitehead and Daly. Things were still very close indeed. Daly expanded that in race 1. We will take a look at that in a moment. But as it stands, Daly will be expanding that yet again, especially if Daly's able to find a way past Alan Matthews and Whitehead has to wait for his opportunity to battle with him. That could be an even bigger points delta, and as we head into the penultimate round in a fortnight's time, things are going to look even more precarious for Andrew Whitehead, defending champion in this championship. That would be disaster. So small mistakes like this could cost Whitehead big time at this phase of the championship. We see Matthews head through the chicane, as does Daly there. Daly with a little bit more action, shall we say, on corner exit, but still closing down on Matthews very much so as we head on to the next lap here. Has a look around the outside. Does Daly. Nowhere for him to go yet, because if he's lured into a false sense of security of the grip and turns the corner entry, he'll soon find himself in the grass and that wall just there, as we saw with Davis and Whitehead a lap ago. Still within 0.3 of a second though is Daly, so hunting down Matthews, putting pressure on Matthews as we head down towards St Mary's in just a moment. Here we go, on to the next lap. No major change of position between these two drivers. Matthews and Daly, 0.3 of a second separating the two. Daly has a brief glance at the outside once again. We've seen this move before, folks. Nothing for him to do this time around, but let's see what we can do as we head into the latter half of this race in a few minutes' time. Daly now has a tighter run down the inside there. Now switches back, actually, to head round to the outside for the upcoming right-hander. This is a fantastic defensive battle. It is so tricky. Oh, it's already tricky to put up a defensive drive in racing conditions. To do so at a high-speed circuit like this as well, I find, can be even trickier still. You don't necessarily have braking zones to your advantage. You've got to think about the close quarters action of just keeping the car on track, especially in the historic leagues, without the benefit of having, as I say, braking zones, etc., to help you out perhaps on your defense, or likewise if you're the attacking driver on your overtakes as well. It's all about gamesmanship and putting that car perfectly on the right line to keep that momentum up, to make sure that both drivers are having fun but safe as well. Matt Daly might have just done so now as we head down towards the Levant. Got for a brief moment at least side by side, has to back out of it though as we head into Woodcote. And there we go. Alan Matthews still leads the charge, but takes a little bit too much curb. Whitehead follows him in that as well. I was about to mention Whitehead by saying that actually in this battling for the top two, Whitehead is the driver who is fastest on track at the moment and is closing up that gap with those two in front, slowing each other down. Matthews has that brief glance over the sausage. It wasn't even a sausage curb, to be fair. It was just a regular curb, which upset the back end of the car at high speed, which is, again, something you have to watch out for here. And there we see Matthews losing a huge amount of time to Daly. Daly's up into the lead of the race now, and Whitehead is the next driver to be hunting down the green and white liveried car. That is a huge issue, unfortunately, for Alan Matthews there, who just in the foreground has a big off at high speed. It's quite easy to do here at this part of the corner. I remember in the older GTA, a few seasons back when we last touched the GTAs, I remember having a quick go of them. Might have even been for a summer series, can't quite remember. But that corner in particular was the one that really caught me out. And an incident very similar to that, actually. Unfortunately for Alan Matthews, he might be losing out to Steve Knight here. Now, wouldn't it be great if Steve Knight can get another podium on his roster for this season? Perhaps an even more important one with a few more drivers in the field for this evening's racing. And Steve Knight is a driver who's closing up on Matthews at the moment. Whitehead through and back into second, so they're back on battle for the lead of this race. But at the moment, Daly controlling things nicely with a 2-second gap to his championship rival as we get closer to the halfway stage of this race. As we approach the halfway stage of this race, Daly still leads the charge. 3 seconds is the gap between himself and Whitehead. They have built a pretty substantial and comfortable gap to P3 now. I think the recurring theme of the Goodwood races has been that these very much are races of attrition, so it seems if you're able to keep the car pointing in the right direction without any major issues or incidents, even if you're maybe even a second or so off the pace, you're going to be rewarded with a decent number of points in this evening's racing, because just look at that gap. Daly and Whitehead haven't really had any major. We saw Whitehead had a brief glance at the wall earlier on, but they're the only two drivers who've really kept the noses clean in the running so far, apart from perhaps Steve Knight. And what we're seeing is that they've got a 15-second margin down to the car in P3 already, which is remarkable stuff, especially when we've still got half race distance to go. But why don't we take the opportunity then to look at the championship standings after race one? Let's see how things are shaping up as they get oh so more important race by race, as I mentioned earlier on, when we get closer to this final part of the year. Matt Daly leads us with 315 points, Whitehead with 303. Then we have Colin Knief, obviously not scoring, not present this evening, 233, which means Alan Matthews is closing up and as it stands will overtake him in the championship standings to the end of this season. So Matt Daly with a 12-point advantage over Whitehead now extends up by 7 points and is looking to replicate that here in race 2, which will make it a 14-point advantage heading into the penultimate round. Then we have Alan Matthews 229 ahead of Miles Davis on 205, Andy Webb's on 151, Jack Hodson no points changed there, he's in 7th position on 108 points. Then we have Steve Knight on 82, followed by Guy Swarbrick 64, Greg Young 30, John Cole 29, Craig Millman, Hilton and Smith no change for those drivers either. But Steve Knight is closing up and could be on a trajectory to actually overtake Jack Hodson in terms of points tally there, as we just saw Andrew Whitehead's GTA 1750 nearly on, in fact it was at least on 3 wheels, perhaps nearly on 2 as well. Very much getting close to a rollover there. Did well to keep it on all four wheels. This car is still possible to roll over, it's just no longer eager to do it, unlike the earlier GTA that we enjoyed earlier on this season. There's a lot more of an accomplished machine is this later revision of the GTA 1750, so as I mentioned before, if you haven't given it a go yet, by all means do. 10 minutes left on the clock then. Daly ahead of Whitehead, ahead of Matthews, Knight, Webb and Davis. Complete your order as it stands as we have 10 minutes to go in this race. Seeing an unfortunate issue for Whitehead there, who has a little bit of an excursion onto the grass there. We saw him lose some time earlier on the previous lap. That gap now expands, doesn't it? And in fact, Steve Knight currently running in P3 in this running, so he's on course for a rather substantial podium here. Perhaps his best podium in the season so far. Might be getting closer to Andrew Whitehead as well. Now, I don't want to wish anything bad against Whitehead. I'd very much like to see him continue to score those points. He's a very accomplished driver who's putting so much effort to keep the AROC Racing Leagues going this season. But my oh my, wouldn't it be impressive to see Steve Knight running in P2? But Whitehead, I'm pleased to report, has got back underway, is pointing in the right direction, has lost a huge amount of time to Daly now, so won't be able to challenge for the race victory at this point. But it will be Daly in P1, then we have Whitehead running in P2, Steve Knight runs in P3, and then we have a couple of closer drivers in the shape of Alan Matthews and Andy Webb, and then we have Miles Davis running along in 6th as well. Let's have a brief glance at what the championship is going to be looking like then as we head into the final couple of rounds. Obviously here this evening at Goodwood, but we still have a couple more fantastic British venues to be paying homage to as we head into the final couple of rounds. So Castle Combe is going to be after Thruxton. This isn't going to be the penultimate round next round, do forgive me. It's a 13 round season, which explains my early confusion as to why I couldn't quite remember if it was the longest season or not. It definitely is the longest season we've had. So it'll be Goodwood followed by Thruxton, which I'm very much looking forward to. That'll be Castle Combe in February, followed by the Silverstone GP circuits to round out the season where we started, of course, on the national layout the very first round, and we'll be finishing things on the Grand Prix course late on this February. In fact, halfway through February, so we will be a decent way into 2026 as we bring an end to this season. But yeah, looking forward to Thruxton and Castle Combe. Thruxton in particular should be a fun one. It's a track that I'm not too familiar with, actually, in terms of driving action, but I am a big fan of. At least I do quite like that venue. I mean, there's no real bad venues here on this season's calendar, it must be said. I think they're all fantastic in their own way. I'm trying to think, my local course here were actually earlier on this year. They were in September and October. Anglesey and Alton Park were the nearest tracks to myself. And yeah, very early on in the season. As I said, this has gone by quickly, but it was quite a few rounds ago now. We've had plenty of action. These GTA 1750s have been putting on a good show for us for a number of weeks now. Two and a half minutes left on the clock, though. Matt Daly navigates the chicane in a more sedate fashion than perhaps he has on a number of occasions so far this evening. Then we jump on board with Alan Matthews. Had some earlier issues this race, unfortunately, given that he started it very well indeed. He's currently running along in P4, has Andy Webb for company potentially, and a race to forget, as it turns out, for Miles Davis in this one. But I think it could well be, if he plays his cards right, a race to remember here for Steve Knight. Only 3 seconds ahead of Alan Matthews, but sometimes that can make all the difference. We have a couple more laps to go. We're on the 15th lap, and we will be ready for lap 17. Which is the expected race duration here. It's pretty consistent in the AROC racing leagues. And yeah, so who knows? We could be seeing Steve Knight on the podium yet. Wouldn't that be exciting? Less than 60 seconds left on the clock. Then Daly heads on to the penultimate lap of this race. Steve Knight not too far behind, and in fact maintaining a decent gap to Alan Matthews at the moment. Let's compare their pace to see how things could be shaping up. Sometimes when I do this, I feel like, do you remember the awful Amazon Web Services predictions and data stats that they were throwing at F1? They didn't mean anything, they were useless. Sometimes I resonate with that. But anyway, here's some lap times for you to enjoy. 26 seconds left on the clock. Steve Knight currently in P3, 126.7 on that last lap. His best lap overall, the 126 flat. Alan Matthews is currently in the 124s in terms of pace. Is closing up as we can see. And will be starting their penultimate lap now. It's going to be very close, folks, because overtakes don't come all that easily here at Goodwood. That is something that we have seen, and sometimes when they have arrived, courtesy of a brave move here or there, it has often gone awry for the attacking driver. So Matthews might not be quite so keen to jump the gun and get ahead just yet. But we'll have to wait and see, folks. The timer has indeed hit 0. We're on the penultimate lap of this race. We're heading towards the end of the penultimate lap, which means we will have to jump on board with Matt Daly at some point on that next lap. But there isn't too much else for him to do, really, on this final lap. He can just sit back, relax, and cruise the car home after what has been a very accomplished race indeed. We're still on the penultimate lap for these two drivers, but this is the close action. This is the battle that really matters now, folks. Not only is it a podium battle, which is something that we very much approve of. It's a podium battle involving a driver who will be, I'm sure, very much appreciative of a podium heading his way as we head into the later stages of this season, and another one to add to his growing tally of podiums as well. I'm sure Steve would be very pleased to see himself be rewarded with some silver, or at least virtual silverware, virtual plaudits and virtual silverware as we head towards the end of this race. Matt Daly is then navigating the penultimate lap, doesn't have that long, final lap doesn't have that long to go as these two drivers start their final lap of this race. Alan Matthews kicks the back end out. There in shot as well is Andy Webb. And we watch on as Matt Daly brings it home very shortly. He's heading onto the Levant straight now. Into the first corner, though, goes Steve Knight. Keeps the nose pretty clean. Is looking pretty comfortable, it must be said. Taking a very nice line there. Alan Matthews not able to close up and make the difference just yet. I suspect if it's anywhere, it's onto the braking zones. As we can see, Steve Knight gets just that little bit more defensive. We have to jump on board, though, with Matt Daly, who heads through Woodcote. It has been a remarkable drive for the yellow liveried car as he strengthens his championship hopes and builds up that gap to Andrew Whitehead, rides through that final corner and heads onto the start-finish straight for one last time to take race to victory. Congratulations, Matt Daly. Another impressive run, a double victory here at Goodwood this evening. We have a small wait for Andrew Whitehead, so we will jump on board with him when we can. But look, it's getting very close quarters here now, folks. Steve Knight's under pressure from Alan Matthews. Not too far behind at all as well is Andy Webb. It could be a three-car battle. We'll have to wait and see. Andrew Whitehead heads through the chicane to complete his race as well. Second place, still a decent haul of points. The championship is still on, crucially. Just perhaps not how we would have wanted it to go. Matthews finds a way past Steve Knight, though, as we head into Woodcote. Is it too little, too late? Steve Knight is going to try and fight for it back. Andy Webb's nearly rolling over. Down the inside goes Steve Knight. He had to try and make the move, of course. It was perhaps a little bit too brave, and that could have cost both drivers a podium. It has cost both drivers a podium there. I imagine there will be some questions pondered after that one. Andy Webb, then, a surprise podium sitter here at Goodwood. Another podium to add to his young AROC Racing League's career. Still an impressive result. I'm sure he's pleased with that one. I'm perhaps not quite so sure he's pleased to maybe not do it on merit, but either way, congratulations, Andy Webb. Kept the nose clean and made the difference where it counts. It's Webb P3 in the end, Miles Davis P4, and then we have Alan Matthews completing the run in P5 and Steve Knight in the end coming home last. What could have been, by all means, I can understand why you might see the gap there and you want to go for it. Such is the way of racing, though. Sometimes one small error here or there can make all the difference. What a shame it did pan out like that, but it was a great battle nonetheless. So thank you to all drivers for partaking in that one and putting on a good show for us. We did see some great victory donuts from Matt Daly last time out. We do get to see them again. He's playing with the more expensive toys now. I think the AROC Racing League success has rather gone to his head now, folks. Look, he's got a Matt Daly liveried helicopter, which he's now phased through and crashed into. You explain that one to the insurance, Matt. But yes, after his AROC Racing League successes, he's now doing donuts around his helicopters. So that is one thing to celebrate at least. Hope you've enjoyed watching this evening much as I've enjoyed commentating. Thank you very much for watching this evening, and a good night.